Can everybody see that?
Hi, no, we just see your camera at the moment.
Okay.
Oh, hold on. Actually, it might be me. Yeah, so I think that's fine. Yeah, we can see that now.
Okay. Okay. Can you still see it?
We just see you're presenting. Yeah, we can see that now.
Okay. Let me just do this. Okay. So thank you everybody for attending. So as Christine said, so my name is Mohammed Chinara. I work with KPMG, and I work in the oil and energy sectors. So my career is basically working in oil and gas. I also spent some time working in. I spent some time working as an enterprise advisor, working with the London Authority, where I essentially help support schools' careers programs. And it's a reason for my participation today. So of course, I understand that I'm talking to Year 12 students, and you're obviously going through your UCAS applications. I don't know if you've done those yet, but it's a nerve-wracking time. And of course, given what's happening with COVID-19, it's quite challenging, and so challenging environment. So I wish you all the best in terms of getting those applications done and getting into the courses of your choice. So in terms of the talk today, so like I said, my background's in the oil and gas industry. So what I'm going to do is talk through my career journey, which has been spent working initially in oil and gas, and now I'm moving more towards energy more broadly. I'll come on to that. I'll talk through some of the academic routes into the industry, and also I'll give you an example of some real world challenges that the oil and gas industry, but actually the society at large is facing in terms of climate change and the impact of energy on the environment, but also in terms of economic development. Of course, I want this to be interactive. It's the first time I'm using Google Hangout, so I'm not sure how it works. I don't see any of the comments, but of course, happy to take questions as and when you have those questions. So in terms of my background, so I'm an advisor at KPMG. KPMG is a large professional services organization. It's classified as one of the big four. So our competitors are Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and PwC. I'm not an accountant. I'm actually an engineer by training. I'm the only petroleum engineer at KPMG out of a staff base of 16,000 people in the UK. So it's quite a strange place for an engineer near to be. KPMG or the Big Four are most commonly known for auditing. So essentially what that means is firms like KPMG and accountants who work at KPMG support or actually audit the accounts of essentially all of the companies that are listed and private in the UK and abroad, to make sure that shareholders and debt holders and other stakeholders have good information before making any investments into those companies. So my background is, like I said, it's in oil and gas, but I've actually worked in quite a few different industries. So I initially started out working for oil and gas companies. So I initially started. So I studied, first of all, I studied chemical engineering at UCL. I then worked for a year as a chemical engineer, which was in downstream oil and gas. I then realized that it wasn't as exciting as I thought, and I went back to university to study for a master's in petroleum engineering at Imperial College London, and then started working for Total, which is a French super major. So they're one of the larger oil and gas companies in the world. They have operations around the world. And I started out working in Aberdeen. Aberdeen is essentially the center of the oil and gas industry in the UK. And I was working on a few North Sea fields. So I spent time offshore on platforms in the middle of the North Sea, which is a really interesting experience. Managing reservoirs for the company. I've also worked for them in Copenhagen and Paris, and in the Middle East, in Qatar. In terms of engineering experience, before starting at KPMG, I was actually based in Oman, in Muscat, which is in the Middle East, and I was working for a national oil company called Petroleum Development Oman. And essentially, I was helping the company or the country manage their oil and gas resources. So I was supporting them with their capital allocation decisions, which essentially just means helping them to decide where to invest their money into which fields, which would give them the greatest rates of return. So that's my engineering experience. I've also spent time working in investment banking. So I've worked for Macquarie and a few other banks in London. And what I did there is I essentially worked in mergers and acquisitions, but in oil and gas. And what that means is, as an engineer, I was supporting the financiers and the bankers understand oil and gas assets. I'll talk more about oil and gas as we progress through this presentation, but essentially oil and gas is found, 10,000 feet below the surface of land or the ocean. And so to understand what those assets are, and if you're an energy company, the majority of your value is in your oil and gas fields. And so having a good understanding of those assets is really important whenever you're working with those types of companies. That brings me on to KPMG. So my role at KPMG is basically to help accountants and auditors understand the value of the assets that companies present to the market. So whether you're BP or Shell or smaller oil and gas companies, and there's hundreds and hundreds of smaller oil and gas companies around the world, they of course will give a view of their asset base. But as an engineer, we need to verify that view, and so my role is basically to support accountants who, of course, are experts in the financial analysis, but don't really have much knowledge of the engineering that underlies a lot of these assets that we're dealing with. So that's what I do in a nutshell. The other thing about my experience, so you'll have talks from lots of different types of people, and I'm sure you'll know people personally from your own backgrounds. But so my experience is quite varied. I haven't stayed with a single company for my career. The most I've spent at a company has been about 4 years. So I've moved around a lot. Now there's pros and cons to that. I think the pros are that you first of all get to work on things that are of interest to you, as opposed to being told what to do, which is always good. But you also manage to build quite a strong knowledge base of different sectors that you might not find in one company. But I also think it's the way the world's moving. So as I was graduating, you'd meet lots of people and I graduated in 2001, so a long time ago. You'll meet lots of people who've spent their entire careers at one company. But I think the way the world's moving, people are a lot more flexible and in terms of their own interests, and also companies are looking for more flexibility in the workforce. So moving around, I think, is becoming more common. An advantage of working at different companies, I think, is that the world's constantly going through flux and change, and as we see with COVID-19, the economy is challenged, and whether you work in banking or in tourism or in the retail sector, pretty much every sector has been affected by this. And if you're used to working in new organizations or in different industries, it builds your own internal capability to be able to adjust as the climate adjusts around you. So that's like I said, that's my background in a nutshell. In terms of my my educational experience, before university, I studied chemistry, biology, physics. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was at school or university, or even university. So I just knew that I enjoyed science, and I studied sciences at A level. My background is so I'm from Leicester originally. That's where I was born and brought up, and so I studied there. And my interests are football. Leicester City is my home team. Travel, as you can see from my work experience. Climate change is an interesting one because I work in oil and gas, and fossil fuels. I don't know how much you follow this, but fossil fuels are contributing to climate change. I think the science behind that is clear. And so how the world's evolving away from the use of fossil fuels towards renewable energy is a really interesting area for me. And I'll come on to that a little bit later in the talk. So, so in terms of my background, so I was the first person in my family to go to university. Uh, I'm sure we'll have lots of different types of backgrounds in the audience, and um, if you have people who've been to university or who know about the industry that you're interested in, that of course is of huge benefit. That's one of the reasons I get involved in these programs, because supporting younger people who have an interest but who may not have an internal network to build knowledge about the professional world can be quite difficult. So so I think these types of events are very useful. Um, like I said, in terms of my route into oil and gas, I had no previous experience, so it's completely new to me. When I was studying, I had no idea about the oil industry that I eventually ended up in. I didn't know anything beyond the fact that you need petrol for your car to fuel it. So so it's important to know that you can build a career path and knowledge in a sector if you have if you're dedicated to build knowledge in any specific area. So like I said, I mean, at 16, I didn't really have a firm career path. I enrolled in sciences for A levels, and I actually started out university as a biochemical engineering student. And at UCL, and I quickly realized when I was looking at the environment around me, at the time at least, chemical engineering had a much broader range of applications as a bachelor's degree program, and so I quickly changed from biochemical to chemical engineering. That's probably an outcome of the fact I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I think an important learning for me or for anyone is to basically, as you continue through your studies, to keep an awareness of what's happening in industry in terms of what your potential future career path could be, and to see where you might want to end up, and that should really guide what your choices are at a younger age. So after chemical engineering, I worked for a year as a chemical engineer. I then went back to study petroleum engineering via a scholarship, and that's really how I ended up in upstream oil and gas. So in terms of my first role in the industry, so without having much prior knowledge, it's always very difficult. I also graduated in a time when the economic environment in the energy industry was quite challenged, and as we are today with COVID-19. So getting your first role is always the most difficult one. And so if you're able to build on any academic experience you have with internships and just learning about the industry away from the academics, that of course always helps. And so, I'd really encourage you to consider internships or, even if it's voluntary positions in companies, just build your capability and your knowledge base in a specific area. As an employer, of course, we know as a graduate, you don't really have much practical experience, but it's really your enthusiasm along with with your academic track record that's important in terms of differentiating yourself from the competition. As with most of my friends, I think I applied to about 100 or 200 positions and rejected from all of them except for one or two. And so being persistent and not losing that motivation is really important in terms of breaking into any industry with graduates. So in terms of what I do right now, I spoke a little bit about what I do in terms of supporting the auditors. This is just an excerpt from my CV. I also work with consulting. Not many people know that accounting firms also have a consulting division. So in addition to the audits, which I've listed at the bottom, I also work in strategy and restructuring. And what that means is, there's lots of words on here, but essentially what that means is I'm basically helping the company to win new business in international markets. I'm using the engineering background that I have to work with companies in the Middle East, in Russia, and in Southeast Asia. And this point, I'm basically helping companies assess their business plans in light of the current environment. So as with most things, the oil price has dropped quite a bit since the start of the year because of COVID-19 and because less energy is being used by the globe. And so companies want to know, is it still profitable to produce oil in the North Sea or in Canada, for example? Where should they be putting their money? And I basically help them with that. So that's really my role at the moment. So now I'll talk more about the engineering and the technical aspects of chemical engineering and petroleum engineering. And like I said, if you follow the debate around Greta Thunberg and climate change, and even if you watch the news last night with regard to the melting of the solar caps, these topics are having a real world impact, and the environment for engineers and for other disciplines is changing quite rapidly. And so I'll just give you a brief insight into that. So first of all, chemical engineering is an excellent degree to take in terms of its flexibility. So as an engineer, of course, you build skill sets that can be used across different industries. You of course build analytical skill sets. You're used to working with data and with computer programming and things like that. But also, it also helps you to develop your problem-solving skills. And so these are really important skills that can be used in any sector. So just in terms of where chemical engineers end up, this is just a range of different types of industries I have friends who work in and who I know, is used. Chemical engineering degree is used. So the first one is the water industry. It's a very important industry, of course, globally in terms of providing safe drinking water and making sure that the water that we have in use is secure. And so there's lots of chemical engineers who work in that. Pharmaceuticals, of course, as well, in terms of course, you'll be following what's happening with COVID-19 and the latest developments around potential vaccine. Well, when a vaccine's found, and that's really in the realm of biochemistry and chemistry, in terms of scaling that up for production, that's going to need the skills of chemical engineers and biochemical engineers to do that. So they're in demand in the pharmaceutical industry as well. On the right-hand side, I've got a picture of finance. So banks and hedge funds and professional services firms, like I said, always appreciate the analytical skill set that engineers bring. And I know people who work in that. I've worked in that industry myself. It's less useful in terms of producing something concrete at the end of it, but it's an industry that's open to you. The bottom left is oil and gas, and I've got a picture of a platform with the sun setting in the background deliberately, because the future of oil and gas is really up for debate right now. I'll talk about this a bit later, but oil and gas is still critical for the world. The world uses 100 million barrels of oil every day. Well, maybe about 95 now, so it's gone down a little bit, but because of COVID, but it's still a very, very important energy source for the world. Of course, there's climate change implications of producing fossil fuels, but we also have to recognize the fact that if you want heat in your homes and you want lights for your schools and hospitals, the energy that we currently use is majority from oil and gas and fossil fuel sources. The center bottom is food production. So I'm sure you've seen the shows around the factories and how they produce different food products. And again, chemical engineers work for the likes of Mars and all the other food companies to make sure that their reactors and their processes are in line with what's required to produce whatever the products are. And the final picture there is around AI, and that's computer science. And again, similar to the financial industry, the skill set you build studying engineering opens up your career path in that field as well. So moving on to petroleum engineering, which is my speciality. This is giving you a very, very high level overview of oil and gas, what it is, where it comes from, and how we get it out of the ground. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of the world as it was 100 million years ago. The continents move, and move around due to tectonic activity. All of the oil and gas we produce today is really from a period of 100 million, 50 million years ago and before that. So the time of the dinosaurs and all of the flora and fauna that existed at that time. Essentially, what happens is that organic material, when these organisms die, they lie on the surface and they get buried over millions of years, and that organic material turns into oil and gas, which we produce today. And we produce that via drilling of oil wells, whether that's onshore and offshore. And that's the reason we classify this as non-renewable energy resources. In essence, once you've used up the oil, it takes 100 million years to produce some new oil, and so it's non-renewable. But of course, there's lots of the carbon dioxide content of burning that is very high, which is why there's a debate and an effort to move away from fossil fuel resources towards more renewable energy resources. So moving on to oil and gas disciplines. So there's lots of pictures on this slide. So in terms of, I'm just giving you an overview of the different types of disciplines that I interact with. So when I was working purely in engineering, I'd manage a team of multidisciplinary experts. So in order to produce oil and gas, we need to understand, first of all, the geology. And so we work with geologists who build pictures of how the environment was 100 million years ago based on the evidence that we obtained from drilling wells. So we use the rock record to understand the types of rocks and the depositional environments of these fields. And we also use geophysicists who help us find the fields in the first place. You might wonder how we can discover if an oil field is 10,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. And we use seismic technology to essentially scan the Earth rock profile and to use those scans to highlight areas where oil and gas fields might exist. Once we find the field, we work with drilling engineers to drill wells into those assets. And then in terms of developing that field, these wells that we drill are very expensive. So the last one I drilled in the North Sea cost £100 million. So reservoir engineering, which is the center picture there, is basically understanding how big the field is and to essentially produce the oil and gas in the most economic way possible. And of course, we work with health and safety experts, with accountants and lawyers and commercial people to basically put together the contracts to make sure all of this happens. So in terms of oil and gas and the debate around climate change, like I said, I knew very little about oil and gas before I started working in the industry. My impression was that you just have a huge tank, a huge cavern underground, but in reality, it's much more complicated than that. The oil and gas is stored in rocks. And in terms of what we use oil and gas for, it's pretty much in every aspect of your life. So anything you can think of in terms of plastics, your gaming devices, pretty much everything that you have and wear will have a component of oil and gas in it. I mean, it's more than just transportation fuel, which is why it's been dubbed that we live in the hydrocarbon age, and it's a reason why the whole transition away from the use of oil and gas and coal towards renewable energies is so difficult. The energy content of fossil fuels is much greater than wind or solar, for example. So it's really about balancing the economics of transitioning away from oil, gas, and coal towards something that's more amenable for the environment. So moving on. So this is really the challenge that the world's facing. So of course, we hear a lot about the energy challenge in terms of climate change, and of course it's a real challenge. If you're a scientist or an engineer and you look at the data in terms of sea level rises and temperature rises and the carbon dioxide emission levels into the atmosphere, the correlations are strong, and so And so I think the scientific debate around whether or not humans are creating climate change is it's almost done in terms of understanding that we do have an impact. The challenge that the world faces is that if we look at data from organizations and like the UN, the reality is 80% of the world's population is in energy and poverty. And what that means is, if you go to regions of Africa, I used to live in South Africa, there's population who don't have, there's people who don't have access to refrigerators, or things that we take for granted, and or even electricity for that matter, which means energy poverty essentially translates into poverty overall. It impacts education, impacts the life chances of of these peoples and populations. And so basically providing energy to a growing global population whilst limiting climate change is really the challenge that the world's facing today. And I'll come on to the fact that we have wind energy and solar energy, which now is becoming more economic and cheaper. The reality is that we haven't really found a combination of different types of energy that we can put together to replace the energy consumption that we have today. So really that challenge of finding an energy source that's clean, or combination of sources that's clean, but that also meets the growing demands of populations around the world that may not have access to the energy that we have access to, is really the challenge that's going to define the next 20 or 30 years of our industry and of the economy, and it's engineers of the future who will really be working on this to come to some sort of solution. So like I said, I mean, the evidence around climate change is compelling. It's clear the temperatures are increasing and that humans are having an impact. And this is just essentially reiterating what I meant in terms of the fact that, so the chart on the right is basically showing you energy consumption globally. And you can see OECD, which is basically the richer countries, the consumption is pretty much flat, because we are in the UK and in the West, in Europe particularly, we are taking some dramatic steps to reduce our emissions by decarbonizing electricity generation, for example. But if you look at China, India, and the developing nations, the energy usage is projected to increase substantially. And so how to meet that challenge whilst reducing our carbon footprint globally is really a big challenge. So in terms of the UK, so again, this is a very busy chart. So when I started in the industry up to about 5 years ago, oil and gas dominated the conversation and was a clear career path for anybody interested in the energy industry. I think the picture over the past 5 years has changed dramatically. If I highlight this chart here, this is showing you how we generate our electricity in the UK today. So you can see, for example, that coal has almost been eliminated. Coal is the highest CO2 emitting source there is. Gas is still playing a big part, of course, because it's less carbon dioxide intensive. But the growth in renewables is really impressive when you look at how it compares to 5 or 10 years ago. And so if you're somebody who's interested in the energy industry, understanding the dynamics of the wind industry and the solar industry is as important, if not more important, than understanding petroleum engineering and oil and gas. And so understanding that the landscape is shifting is really important. And the other aspect of this is that from a societal level, not just from an engineering perspective, it's clear that the governments so the UK government, for example, has legislated for net zero.
Sorry, Mohammed, there's some background noise there. I don't know if it's we can hear. Sorry, I thought it was one of the students.
It was me. Sorry, I was trying to switch off my phone. I couldn't do it. But
that's fine. Thank you.
Right. So basically, the government in the UK has legislated for the fact that we need to be net zero by 2050, which means as a country we can't emit more carbon dioxide than we take in. And so it's pretty clear whether or not you're looking at this from a scientific or political perspective. The reduction of fossil fuel emitting fuels is a really important goal for the country and for the globe. So to summarize, the energy industry it's a very interesting industry. I think it's going through a period of transition. So like I said, when I graduated 15, 20 years ago, I graduated into a very different environment where I could pretty much focus on my core competency of chemical and petroleum engineering. I think the world we're living in now means that if you are interested in the energy industry, you really need to be aware of the trends in renewable energy and to understand how that's impacting both the jobs landscape, but also the landscape of the future in terms of what both global populations and our politicians want to see as we develop towards a less carbon dioxide emitting type environment. And so to summarize, I think it is a very interesting industry. It's you're at the leading, in terms of working in this, you're at the leading edge of trying to ensure that the planet is in good hands for the future. And like I said, any questions, please feel free to ask. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions.
So I've just put in the chat function, Mohammed, are there any apprenticeships into your career, or do you really need to have gone to university?
So yes, they are. So I mean, at my own firm, KPMG, we're very strong on supporting apprenticeships. It's not necessarily into oil and gas. It's more into the professional services profession. But yes, that is supported. And I'm pretty sure that the likes of Shell and BP will also have similar programs supporting students into that. But I'll need to go away and do a bit more research into that.
Okay, great, thank you. There's a couple of other questions just in the chat box on the right-hand side. There's 2 more questions in there from students. We can't see you. Your camera's gone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So in terms of, so from Alexander, I think that's a really good question in terms of where do you get recent, how do you find out about what's happening? I mean, if you just Google climate change, oil and gas, you'll come up with tons of different resources. And I think what's from a student perspective, actually from any perspective, I think what's really interesting is that the whole discussion around climate change and how we address that is a very new debate. So nobody really has any answers around that. People are looking for answers, and so everything that we're talking about around oil and gas and the energy transition is pretty much new for anyone, whether you work in banking, whether you work in engineering. I mean, even the likes of BP and Shell. If you follow that, and if you follow those press releases, you'll see that they've started to invest in wind energy and solar panels, but they don't really understand the business models of these companies. So, if this is something that's of interest, it's a really great chance for you to learn at the same speed as more seasoned professionals, because anybody graduating into this field now will start at pretty much the same level as everybody else, even mature people. So I'm doing a lot of reading around wind and solar and trying to understand how those industries work and how they compare to oil and gas. I hope that answered the question. And then the second one was around how long it takes. So my degree was 3 years, and then it's a 1-year master's program, which is pretty standard, I think. But that's, and then after that, it's 15 years of experience, like I said, in different organizations. So it's about really just, like I said, keeping your eye out for opportunities that you think are interesting, and essentially exploring those opportunities. And it might not always be with the same organization. It's just about being aware of the market.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. It was really, really interesting. I was just saying that when I was at school, I don't think I'd ever heard of a petroleum engineer, and it sounds like a really cool job.
Neither had I. So,
right, guys, if there's no other questions, I'll let you all log off. Thank you very, very much. It was great hearing from you, and hopefully we can get you back to speak again. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. If there's any questions or follow up, please feel free to let me know yourself, Christina. So yeah,
that's great. Take care. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.